Hello and welcome to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, Minnesota's best weekly breakdown of political news inside and outside the Capitol. Today, Walter Hudson and I are interviewing Minnesota Secretary of State candidate Kim Crockett. I met Kim at many conservative events across the state, and she's worked on election integrity issues for Minnesota Voters Alliance and more recently, the American Majority, where she's gathered in groups of dozens and dozens of people in cities across the state to teach them about election integrity, some of the issues that we have in our elections. And now she's kicked off her campaign to be Minnesota's next Secretary of State. So, Kim, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners, give us a little bit of your background? And of course, the first question is, why are you running for Minnesota Secretary of State?
Well, I'm a sixth generation Minnesotan. And absolutely love this state. It's a tough love affair for a lot of different reasons. But my background, just sort of in a simple way, is law. I'm a lawyer by training, mom, and longtime sort of advocate, if you will, in different arenas here in the state. And in 2020, my spidey sense went off because I felt that was just an absolutely critical election, both in Minnesota and nationally. And I just turned all my sort of policy guns, if you would, to studying election law, volunteering anywhere I could to learn about the election process. And I've been a lawyer on election day or election season here in Minnesota for well over 20 years. So it's not something that was new to me. But I saw all sorts of new things happening, and we can get into those details, Jeremy. I saw our Secretary of State signing consent decrees that changed the law outside of the legislative process, denying you as a legislator and your colleagues your constitutional duty and right, which is to make our laws for elections. I saw Mark Zuckerberg not only using his power as a big tech titan to control and change the narrative about the election, candidates, and issues, but he came into our state with over $7 million, spent over $400 million nationally to, in my opinion, manipulate the vote, to get out the vote in a way that was very partisan. So those are the sort of mega trends that I saw happening. And it was like being caught in this swirl, being in the middle of it, volunteering as an attorney to help boots on the ground here and in Wisconsin, Georgia, other places. And I have to tell you, I took a little bit of time off after leaving Georgia, the Senate races down there, because I went there as a volunteer attorney to try to help keep that process fair. And I spent about a month, again, in deep study, and even thought about leaving Minnesota. It was February, but I came back to Minnesota and just fell in love with our lakes, our trees, the people here, our traditions. And it started a thought in my head, well, I can complain about this, right? I want my vote to count, just like you do. And if it doesn't count, I mean, I have to fight for that. My vote should count in Minnesota, and I shouldn't have to worry about whether it did. And so that's kind of a long road that led to the decision to run for Secretary of State.
Well, I really appreciate you running. Learning about elections is it's complicated. There's a lot of nuances about it. There's it's very hard. It's a very personal topic for a lot of people. It's almost like healthcare, where it becomes you touch a nerve, you strike a nerve with so many people, and immediately it's a divisive issue. I mean, the Secretary of State, first of all, the role, it usually hasn't been glorified in previous years. My dealing with the Secretary of State, I've dealt with them a lot in my business because I file new businesses, I look up businesses and stuff, and that's a big part of the role. But obviously, elections is has become such a stronger portion of that job, and of course politically, and so it's become so important for conservatives to have free, fair elections. And Democrats would say the same thing. It just means something differently when we both use those terms. One of the things that I've been speaking about the last year and a half, especially since the election, has been about the consent decree that Steve Simon authorized or signed, that court case specifically, because you can talk to liberals and independents about what happened and whether or not the legislature should have authorized these changes, or whether the Secretary of State can go through the courts and change election law without the legislature's approval. Can you explain that to the listeners, and why the consent decree should not have been authorized?
Right. And I'll just start by saying that the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has already weighed in on this. So it's not Kim Crockett's opinion, but they ruled against Simon in a case that was brought by two presidential electors in the 2020 cycle, who challenged the consent decree in federal court as violating both the Minnesota Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, and they won that case. So it's not just Jeremy Munson or Kim Crockett, complaining about Secretary Simon. What he did is, there's this group called the Democracy Docket, run by the most powerful lawyer in the country. His name is Mark Elias. He is the DNC lawyer, attack dog. He's brilliant. He's unafraid. He's aggressive. And frankly, we need a few people like him on the Republican side. But he's the author of the Steele dossier. He was Hillary Clinton's lawyer, and he cut his teeth here in Minnesota back in 2008 during the Norm Coleman race against Al Franken, or Franken-Coleman race, that resulted in Franken going to the U.S. Senate instead of Norm Coleman being returned, I think, properly to the U.S. Senate that year. So that's who Mark Elias is. Well, he comes in and he sues the Secretary of State in what can only be called kind of a fake lawsuit, arguing that certain changes should be made to Minnesota's election law because of COVID, or consider other considerations of the plaintiffs. And he actually had multiple suits.
Can I interrupt you just briefly? Because I want to take the listeners kind of a step before that, before Democracy Docket, because when COVID hit last March, was it last March? 2 Marches. Well, yeah, last March in 2000.
I know, it seems like a longer time ago.
Yeah. The Secretary of State came to committee in the Minnesota House.
Yes.
He used to be a House member, but he came to the committee and said, we have a major issue with COVID. We're going to have to change our election laws to accommodate this pandemic. And Republicans and Democrats got together and said, okay, what do we need to change? He asked for the world. He asked for mail-in ballots. He asked for being able to change election locations. He asked for a lot. And Republicans and Democrats got together and gave him a package of bills to change election law that they agreed on. I think it went a little too far, but that was a compromise. And when that legislation passed in May, Governor Walz signed it into law. Okay. So we made the changes for COVID. So the idea that, this is unprecedented times, this is why it needs to happen, is wrong, because the legislature acted in our constitutional authority to change election law. That passed. And then right after the governor signed the bill, then Democracy Docket came in and sued for the rest of the stuff that Steve Simon had requested. So I'll let you take it from there.
They exactly. No, that's a really important point. In this case, the legislature acted responsibly. It acted in a timely manner. It heard the Secretary of State's concerns, and the process works the way it's supposed to. As you say, in that the governor signed the law, and off we went. We had different rules, like absentee ballots being open 14 days, before the election. There were, to change the statute, things like that, and the PPE and the polling places and so forth. So that's a very good point. But they weren't going to take no for an answer. And Elias has literally dozens of suits in states across the country, not just Minnesota. And he's also playing in the redistricting space right now too, asking for the moon. So he comes. This is his business model in simple terms. He comes in and sues a friendly Secretary of State. Steve Simon is a star among Democratic secretaries of state. So sues the Secretary of State in Ramsey County, and the Attorney General's office pretends to negotiate with the DNC. It's not actually the DNC. I'm trying to remember if they were a party or if they have these very sympathetic sounding plaintiffs, plaintiff groups. They often work with the League of Minnesota or the League of Women Voters.
Women voters, yeah,
yeah, which is not a nonpartisan group anymore. By the way, it's very much a partisan group, and they come up with this sort of pretend settlement called a consent decree. And in the case of the LaRose case that you and I are referring to specifically, it was approved by a Ramsey County judge by the name of Sarah Gruing. Well, Sarah is she's a rock star in the DFL here in Minnesota and nationally. Former political director for Senator Amy Klobuchar, who, by the way, has become an activist in the space of taking over state election laws from Congress. So it's a neat and tidy little family there, right? So you have a DNC activist lawyer, Mark Elias, coming in through the democracy docket, suing a Democrat Secretary of State in Ramsey County, and it's approved by a judge who, should be neutral, should be a nonpartisan at this point since she's on the bench, Dayton appointee. The three of them agree to change the law in Minnesota for our elections without consulting the legislature. And that's the one that the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals said you cannot do that. And that case will be built on. That's the kind of thing that in the future the legislature should consider censuring, by the way, at a minimum.
Yeah,
censure the judge,
and
issue a censure of the secretary.
And I've, just for disclosure, I've co-authored articles of impeachment against that judge, because I also believe that was wrong what happened. And so
Yes.
Explaining to a liberal or an independent that here the Secretary of State and the legislature agreed to work on changes to address COVID. They came to a compromise. The governor signed it into law. Then the liberal groups sued the Secretary of State, Steve Simon. He basically threw up his arms and said, "Oh, you're right. Let's just settle this in court," and had a liberal judge rubber stamp this consent decree, thereby changing election law by usurping the legislature and the democratic process by which we write laws in this state. And so you have the executive branch basically changing the rules for themselves, right? Because the rules that the Secretary of State must follow. And so when someone asked me, was the election in Minnesota legitimate or was it illegitimate? I say it was illegitimate because the election that happened in 2020 did not follow our existing rules, our existing laws.
Precisely.
So it was illegitimate. And
we came to the same conclusion. Yeah, we came to the same conclusion at Minnesota Voters Alliance. I sent you a link to an article that I wrote in 2020 that goes through the long list of things that, I don't think the word lawless is too strong. And let's review what that consent decree allowed and why it's a big deal. And they are things, in my opinion, you tell me as the House, that I don't think the legislature would have agreed to. So the three basic things in that consent decree were extending the election 7 days after Election Day. So that we were counting, what that means is we were counting ballots until November 10th. Signatures on pre-registered absentee ballot voters the counter signature, the witness signature was waived as unnecessary. The argument in court from Mark Elias, and he's kind of a hysteric when he argues these things in his briefs, that it was dangerous for people who vote by absentee to be around someone else to get a witness that they are who they say they are, which is the function that that plays. And then one of the other things that Democracy Docket Elias loves to argue is that no one should be required to put postage on an absentee ballot. I'm trying to remember if, postage. I know what it was. It was
a
the
postage stamp. Yeah,
it
so
was,
that
yeah.
he
argues
all of the absentee ballots go out with a with an addressed envelope for return with a stamp, but they argued that they did not have to be postmarked by that 7 days, so you could just have ballots show up without a postmark and no idea when that came in, and that was allowed.
Right. And so let's review for a moment, because I think our love affair with absentee voting has gotten a little out of control. We're a long ways from the old days of voting on election day together. And you may not be old enough, but I am, to remember when the vast majority of Americans, wherever I've lived, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Illinois, the places I've lived as a voter, where most people voted on election day unless you had an excuse. So,
yeah. And I live out in rural Minnesota, south of Mankato, in a rural township. And when I first moved here about 18 years ago, we had to go into Lake Crystal, which is a few miles away, and we'd go into Lake Crystal a few miles away. We'd see our neighbors, we'd vote. They would verify who we are because they know us, and we would vote. And then the next election cycle, ballots appear in my mailbox 45 days ahead of the election time. And to be honest, it's nice to get the ballot early because you can flip it over and vote for judges. I've been involved in politics. I don't know who the judges are. I don't know the background. Right. I don't know, so I
lawyers don't know who they are.
Yeah, I vote against incumbents just out of principle. But now I can actually do research on everybody. So there's a benefit to getting it early. But now with the internet, you can go out and research, get a sample ballot and see who's going to be on it. But for the last, 16 years, I've been in a mail-in ballot only precinct. So if I can't find my ballot by election day, I can't go to Lake Crystal anymore to vote. Right. I show up there and they say, you don't vote here anymore. You have to go another half an hour in the other direction to go to Mankato, to the county seat. And so I have towns in my district that are 45 minutes away from the county seat in good weather. And in November, if we have a snowstorm or something, it might take them over an hour to get there to vote. And so it's disenfranchising rural voters by closing all of these precincts.
Yeah, that's another topic. We should finish our love affair, why absentee balloting has gotten a little out of control. But let me just throw in 1,345 precincts out of a little over 4,000 precincts in Minnesota are now closed. And they're in greater Minnesota. They are mail ballot precincts now. When Steve Simon came into office, I believe it was something like 580 precincts had been closed under I guess a 1983 law that said if you have a township of 400 registered voters or less, you don't have to run an election. Maybe people are too spread out, for whatever reason, the township. Well, it's become something that they've pushed. They pushed it under Mark Ritchie, whom we had for 8 years, and Simon has increased it from that 580 or so to, almost 1,400 precincts. And I have the documents to help you and anybody else who wants to reverse mail balloting in their township. There are a couple of things that townships do, right? And I'm sympathetic to small towns, but come on. One is roads, maybe fire suppression. And I used to chair my fire board, by the way. And the other is running elections. And I think we've reached a point as citizens where we've woken up and said, wow, maybe we didn't take our right of franchise, our right to vote, as seriously as we might have, especially as conservatives, where we've just kind of taken our eye off the ball in terms of election process, and frankly let very partisan people like Mark Ritchie and Steve Simon pull Minnesota even further into what I call sloppy practices.
Yeah.
That started, frankly, when I was a teenager, and Joan Grow was the Secretary of State for like 15 or 20 years. So let's look at absentee ballots. I mean, just to finish the mail ballot thought, why in the world would you put your ballot in the mail? It's your most precious act. It's your duty and your privilege as an American to vote. Why in the world would you just throw it in a mailbox? I want to go down to my precinct. Or, maybe I do direct balloting the week before at my city hall. I want to talk to my city clerk. I want to say hello. I want to see my neighbors. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's
And, and,
awesome. We got
and
to promote that.
on the trusting your post office issue, what a lot of people in rural Minnesota don't know is that the rural sorting post offices were almost entirely closed about 10, 12 years ago. And for instance, Mankato, St. Cloud, there's a bunch of rural sort that if I was to ship a letter, if I wanted to mail my neighbor who's a mile away, if I wanted to mail her a letter, I put it in my post box. It used to go to Mankato, get sorted, and would be delivered to her the next day. Now it goes to Mankato, then it gets shipped to Minneapolis, where
Oh, wow.
the rural sort is deprioritized, and it might take another 2 days for that mail to be sorted, and then come back down to Mankato, come to my local Lake Crystal post office, and then be delivered 4 days later. So that's how long it takes my ballot to get from my house to the post office, and it is not postmarked until the rural sort happens 2 or 3 days later in Minneapolis. So that the path for your letters now in rural Minnesota to get to your county seat takes so much longer and goes through
Right.
so many more machines and trucks. So the risk of
Why?
losing your mail is so much higher.
Right. And I'll throw something else in there. Um, the postal union, and these are good people. I'm buddies with the people that deliver my mail. They know me, I know them, I know the folks up at the local post office. They're good people, but there's a union involved, the postal union, and they are partisan. They endorse candidates, and with almost no exception, they endorse Democrats. So as a Republican, it makes me uncomfortable to ask rural Minnesota to entrust their voting, not just to that circuitous route from a mailbox to being counted, but also it's being carried by um, um, a union that has a stake in the outcome of the election. And I think we heard enough things. I mean, I was a lawyer in Philadelphia for a number of years after law school. And the stuff I could tell you that went on, oh my gosh, make your hair stand up. So, but let me go back to a point I wanted to make so that people start thinking about this, because we do have a love affair with absentee voting, because as Americans, it's all about our convenience, right? I mean, I keep waiting for young people to say, I want to vote on this, Kim. Don't tell me I have to go to some building somewhere and talk to my neighbors. They want to, phone it in. Um, when we agreed as a country to shift over to absentee balloting, the principles involved were to make it as close as possible to election day voting. So, what is that? You walk in, and the place is supposed to be manned by something called the party balance rule, where in every precinct, no excuse, in Minnesota, you're supposed to have Democrats and Republicans, representatives of the major parties, working together to make sure that everything goes smoothly that day and that every vote is counted fairly. Well, we're supposed to extend that balance, that partisan balance, into the absentee ballot process. And what's happened in Minnesota is the Democrats, when they had that trifecta back under Dayton in 2013, I believe it was, shifted us from, I don't know how many days of early voting we had. It was probably like a week or two, to 46 days of early voting. And so now we have 6 weeks of voting before Election Day, voting centers only in the cities, right? While they suppress the vote in rural Minnesota, it's become this sort of retail wholesale thing in the cities. And it's just bizarre to me that we're asking, first of all, voters to make a decision about candidates and issues 6 weeks before the election's over, before the campaigns have concluded. And then you have all the sloppy election rules that started under Joan Grow in the 70s, where we got rid of simple common sense things like voter ID. Voter ID has been vilified. Why?
Well, it's certainly a priority for Republicans to get voter ID to the governor's desk for signing into law. But it's obvious that we need a Republican governor to
Yes.
sign that into law.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, and so what I like to
Or
tell
a
people
really
is,
unusual Democrat.
yeah, what I tell people is that elections start with being the most secure. Voter ID, do the Iraqi stain somebody's finger when they vote so they can't vote twice. Do a whole bunch of things to have it be super secure. And then every rule change from there, absentee ballots, overseas voting, mail-in ballots, all of those take away from the integrity of our election. So
Right.
we must write rules for how we're going to secure those votes. One of the things that's always bothered me, and you mentioned having both parties present during the vote so that they have an opportunity to challenge things and to question a voter. When you have early voting for 45 days, there's no one in the office at the election
Right.
office except the city
The clerk.
staff. Yeah, we don't
Right.
have volunteers in the office sitting there 8 hours a day looking at everybody that comes in and votes. So those people are voting without that integrity, without that security. Same thing with mail-in ballots, especially when you remove signatures. And another problem I have is with the mailboxes, or the drop boxes.
The drop
So
boxes.
we have a law in our books that says you can only bring in up to 3 ballots per election cycle for someone else. If I
Right.
want to go to the nursing home and pick up the ballot of my grandmother and bring it in for her, I have to sign an affidavit saying I have permission to bring this in, and they log it in their system so that Jeremy Munson can only bring in 2 more ballots for this entire election cycle. Now, if there's an unmanned drop box outside, I could drop off 100 of them. So how can
Yep.
you have a law in the books that says you require affidavits and only 3 per election, but then also have unmanned drop boxes? These are
Right. It's
laws in
inconsistent.
conflict. Yeah,
Yes.
so we need to
And
resolve that.
the Republicans fell for that one last session.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree.
And I took
Shame on
them to
them.
task. I took them to task for it. That's the only so-called election integrity measure that was passed in 2021, is
Yeah.
actually giving Steve Simon the regulations he was looking for ballot boxes that just sprung up. Where'd they come from, Jeremy? I mean,
Right.
they just appeared. And he came to the legislature and said, "Oh my God, we have ballot boxes, legislature, and they're unregulated. This is terrible. Will you help me make sure we have video on them? And that if Jeremy, backs up with his pickup truck and, wraps some chains around it, he can't pull it up out of the ground." All these absurd things. Well, who's watching that video? I mean, use your common sense.
Yeah.
What security is there? Although a friend of mine at a group called True the Vote out of Texas did some geofencing of the ballot boxes in Georgia last year. And it has resulted in an investigation down in Georgia of the ballot boxes, because there were groups of people dropping off, literally dozens of them in the middle of the night, and they'd take a selfie with their ballots to prove that they had been, that they could get their $10 a ballot or whatever. They were ballot harvesting.
Wow.
And that's turning into something down there. So, but it's all looking backward. And what I want to do as Secretary of State, if I can talk about that a little bit
Sure.
briefly, is to ask the legislature to change our approach to elections so that we have good rules right up front. If you're looking backwards after an election, not only is it upsetting to everyone and potentially creating chaos, um, but it's very hard to look back and figure out what happened. Our elections are designed. You and I have talked about this when we've seen each other around the state. Elections are designed to be final within a very short period of time. Our election jurisprudence, if you will, doesn't anticipate a lot of looking back except when we have close elections. And as we all know, living in what I call the land of 10,000 close elections, it's a very unsatisfying, frustrating process. And so I think my hope is that the people of Minnesota are tired of what's going on in our state. It's a mismanaged state and has been, to the point where good people who want to live here are leaving. And this is not a new story. It's not like it's just this last couple of years under walls. This has been going on for decades, where it's just kind of understood that at some point, if you reach a certain level of wealth or a certain age or both, you pack up as a taxpayer and you go somewhere else. But young people are leaving who have businesses, and they're just saying, okay, I can do this somewhere else. So I'm hoping people are tired of the mismanagement and that they will usher in a statewide slate of really good candidates, get us a new governor, a new AG, and a new Secretary of State, where we can look at these things and move very quickly to say, what would it look like in Minnesota to have that confidence after Election Day that we just did a really good job for everybody?
One of the difficulties in talking about elections with someone in the middle or on the left is that for me, it's important to explain we don't have integrity in our elections if someone's vote is being canceled. It's not just about the
Right.
left is so focused on disenfranchising or denying someone the right to vote. It's also important to talk about if someone who has the right to vote votes and then their vote is canceled by someone who doesn't have the right to vote. We have to it's an equal disenfranchisement that we need to be better at explaining when we're out talking about election integrity. One of the topics that's really important to me too is, and you mentioned this on the onset, is big tech getting involved in our
Mm-hmm.
elections. I've long said that Facebook has the ability, if Facebook would share all of their data with the left, and maybe they already are, but they already know exactly how you're going to vote. They know everybody in America who has a Facebook account. They don't even have to post stuff. They can just pause as they're scrolling through or
Yeah,
like stuff, and Facebook knows how they're going to vote. Um, the data out there is kind of scary. But one of the things that
it is.
Zuckerberg did is he put $400 million into a nonprofit that would spend that money in specific targeted precincts across the United States in order
Right.
to
To get
influence the
out the
vote.
vote.
Right
Yes.
now, explaining that to people that it's not illegal, maybe it should be. We can do that in the legislature, but it isn't necessarily fraudulent votes that we're concerned about here. It is influencing the get out the vote to specific precincts, which is unconstitutional under federal law to have a government specifically pushing money or giving certain privileges to certain groups and not
Right.
others.
Over others. Right.
Can you explain how talk about this organization and how it influenced the election and how many different cities or counties in Minnesota?
Well, and remember, big tech didn't just, this is the Center for Tech and Civic Life that you're talking about, they spent more than Congress, or about the same as Congress, on the 2020 election. He and his Mark Zuckerberg and his wife just cut a check. And by the way, they got a $200 million tax break. I mean, my God, it's just kind of hideous. So not only is big tech, I think, manipulating the conversation through cancel culture and also using tech platforms to drive people to a certain opinion or outcome that would be different perhaps if they were just left to freely think for themselves. But they've actually put boots on the ground now through the Center for Tech and Civic Life. um, I think it was something like 15 jurisdictions here. A friend of mine at MVA has actually got all the data on that. I know it was 2.3 million in Minneapolis alone. And it included things like ballot boxes, by the way, mobile units to pick up votes. Did anybody pull up to your house, Jeremy,
No,
and
but
say, Mr. Munson, we've got a mobile unit here for you and your wife and any other adults that might be living here. Can we pick that up for you? I mean,
right.
think about that.
And so it's not illegal for people for people in those communities to vote, but it's illegal to
Right.
spend millions of dollars just going out in specific precincts to target Democrats to get
And
them to
hoover
vote.
up, right,
And
and hoover up the ballots.
yeah,
What
and
could possibly go wrong with that?
this money didn't just go to Minneapolis and spent by that group. This group actually gave money
Right.
directly to the municipality and
Right.
had basically employees working for the city and county directing where the ballot boxes should be placed, and
Yes.
designing their strategy for get out the vote for those areas.
Right. And my understanding is that Green Bay is kind of the poster child of this whole thing, where it was just like a wholesale replacement of the operation there. And
Yeah.
that's in litigation with the Thomas More Society and Amistad Project right now, trying to get to the bottom of that. That came out of literally left field during 2020. And it was shocking because it caught everybody off guard. It the I mean, what do you do when local government is accepting all this money, and the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the Governor of Minnesota are all just, they're okay with it. Yeah, this is great. We're having a pandemic. Gosh, thanks, Mark Zuckerberg, for leaning in and helping us with our elections. And
Yeah.
because in Minnesota, it's all become about voter turnout rather than counting every legal vote. And I think we need to rethink our culture as a state to show respect for one another's right to vote as we sort through sort of who we've become as an electoral body. And 2022 is a great time, for us to do that and have that conversation. Um, we're not even supposed to talk about these things, Jeremy. This podcast, I mean, people would recommend probably to me as a candidate that I not talk about these things. It's very dangerous in a cancel culture. But my approach to restrictions on my speech is to speak more, to be unafraid, and say that the more speech we have cures that type of restrictive culture that they're trying to impose on us from the far left.
Well, and I think what I listened to you as you've given presentations around the state, and I've been so impressed with how you've delivered this information, because you don't go down the big fraud wormhole, which it gets really dark, convoluted, and it's difficult to explain. And it doesn't help people that go out and talk to others, because as soon as they say that word, it shuts down people in the middle and people on the left. But your information and what we've covered today on the podcast is fact-based information, and it's things that we need to address in Minnesota we can look to the 2020 election and the results and the manner in which it was held in order
Yes.
to address these things going forward. And I'm very fearful for seeing the mask mandates come back in Minneapolis and St. Paul, like they're
Yes.
constructing this emergency again to influence the upcoming election, where they're behind in polling to maintain control of our state. How is your campaign going since you've kicked off? And I want to give you an opportunity to give us your website, how people can contribute and become involved, and how they can learn about caucusing for you on February 1st.
Well, thank you. Yeah, in fact, I was just looking at the time, and I do have a team meeting here shortly. And I have not been campaigning for even a month yet. So I'm a couple days away from being a month in, and there were a variety of reasons why I waited until sort of that second week of December to announce. Things are going really well. Um, people, you know, people are very focused on election integrity. You can't turn around, you can't turn around without bumping into someone who wants to talk about it. And so the campaign's going well. There are different ways to help. And I purposely came up with a really simple website that everybody can remember. And you don't have to know how to spell Crockett. It's just kimsos.com. So it's me sending out an SOS, kimsos.com. And there are different ways that you can help. Obviously, campaigns cost money. We're raising money. I'm current with kind of what I need to be spending, but it's amazing how you got to get ahead, as you know, on a campaign and spend before you need it. So we need help, whether it's $10 or just for those of you out there who can, you can give me up to $2,000. It's $2,000 per person for this. There's not a lot of people that can do that, but if you're one of them, I just throw that out there. But if it's $20, I am grateful. And there's a nifty little online WinRed donation site where you can do that. And also our mailing address is on kimsos.com, my P.O. box. We do need people to caucus for me. I think it's a really cool opportunity to go to caucus this February 1st. If you've never done it before and you're one of those people in the medical freedom movement or the vaccine pushback movement. I met the Mask Off group last night at a tea party. These are, caucusing may sound odd, but it's kind of like voting. You get to go to your neighborhood caucus and see people that you might not have seen for a while or ever met before. And what I'd ask you to do is bring 3 friends who can vote for you to be a delegate to your BPOU. And if you sign up for my emails, I'll explain what all that stuff means. But yeah, I need people to donate. I need people to caucus for me this February 1st. And just generally support the campaign. Invite me to speak to your church group, your BPOU, whatever it might be. Because this is what I'm doing full time, Jeremy. I'm setting aside my own law practice and consulting practice and just giving away my time and energy to the people of Minnesota in hopes of becoming the Secretary of State.
Well, great. Kim, thanks for the interview today. And
You're
again,
welcome.
it's KimSOS, all one word, .com to learn more about Secretary of State candidate Kim Crockett. So Kim, thanks for being on the show.